This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Well, the idea for this video was actually pretty simple. I mean, you liked the first one where I tore into some cars, so let's do another one that actually praises some cars. So why don't we look at 10 cars throughout F1 history which really exceeded expectations and made people go, "Oh my god, what the hell happened?" Or if you weren't a fan of theirs, you were going like, "Oh. Ow." Starting with the 1979 Ligier. This in 1980 is basically where this French team became Prost peaked. No, seriously, after 1980 it was all downhill from there. The JS11 was probably one of the better examples or copycats of the ground effect perfected by the Lotus 78. Now, does that car appear on the list, Law? Well, yeah, we'll get to that, as well as having a cheeky Lotus-related debate. Anyway, this then radical aerodynamic approach enabled Ligier to dominate the early stages of 1979, with the irreverent Jacques Lafitte clinching victories in Argentina and Brazil. No one expected Ligier to be that good, as in, it was outpacing the likes of Ferrari and Lotus, much bigger teams. The team had only been around for a couple of years or so this was a huge achievement and a real sign for the future that it was going to be really, really good. And 1980, it was even better. They were second in the Constructors, third in 1979. But that is, as I said, that's when they peaked. Because the immense downforce exposed structural weaknesses in the monocoque. It wasn't readily remedied, and it probably was just down to the fact they were a relatively small team when compared to Ferrari and Lotus, and they just didn't have the time, resources, and manpower to be able to rectify it. Nevertheless, though, it was still a really good sporting effort, and one of the better examples of everyone going to Colin Chapman's development and going, "Write it down! Write it down!" Just so you know, the Brabham BT19 is not on this list. Not because it doesn't deserve to be there, it's just because it's so dang obvious. I do want to include a 2009 car, but the other competitive car that year, the Red Bull RB5. The car that I would signify as the car that eschewed the party team aesthetic and made people realise that, dang, Red Bull's good. You see, Ford? That's how you give it a go! Designed by Adrian Newey, this marked the dawn of a new era for Red Bull racing, with a win only 3 races into its existence. It was a wild response to sweeping regulatory changes for that particular season, which of course, as we saw, the Brawn car masterfully exploited, but the Red Bull was already pretty good without the double diffuser initially. It capitalised on the rules by maximising underbody airflow and incorporating tightly packaged rear suspension for bettering channeling of air. And yes, of course, the Brawns completely ate up the Red Bulls to begin with, but like I said with the Ligier, Brawn were really penny pinching. I mean, like, really penny pinching. They only upgraded the wing once, and that was it in terms of technical development, which allowed, once the double diffuser had been rendered legal multiple times that year, for Red Bull, Ferrari, all of the other teams to catch up, with Adrian Newey really catching up the most. And yes, it didn't win the Constructors' title, but it became very, very close and brought Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber plenty of glory, and really established things for the RB6, which is the 2010 version, which is more better remembered. But I think we should spare some love for the RB5. It was a real turning point in that team's history. And the turning point in this video is for me to tell you that it is brought to you by the good people over at Squarespace. They're the all-in-one website builder that's perfect for folks like me. And you too, most likely, but for me, a ladder man, yeah, I'm pretty good. And Squarespace has really given me the confidence to really give a go at website design again, after years of doing it, but then just putting it on the back burner for it being too difficult. These tools, though, oh, they're good. It's way simpler than I expected, being able to launch a sleek site, connect with your audience, or even starting selling your products or services. They got everything you need all in one place. And one feature I really like is the next-gen design tools, which makes the process even easier than before. With Blueprint AI, you can whip up a custom site in just a few steps. It even gives you tailored design suggestions based on your brand, which in my case is ladders, so that's pretty good going, Squarespace. Not to mention, it could easily cater to takes of mine which age like the finest of milk. Add to that their drag and drop editor and tweaking your layout or adding your own flair, it's just a breeze, no tech stress required. So if you've been thinking about building a site, go to squarespace.com/LawVS to save 10% on your first website or domain. Once again, a huge thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now on to the next one. McLaren, their MP4 4. of 1988. Yes, this is kinda obvious, but the McLaren MP4 stands as one of the most dominant machines in Formula 1 history, securing 15 wins in 16 races during that season. This car was engineered specifically to optimize performance for the turbos before they were banned the following year, so it was almost like a last hurrah, slanting the driver back, reclining them more in a way we are more accustomed to. So this was sort of slowly evolving it without anybody really realizing. It was so low profile, and it was right before they decided to bring back the airboxes again. It had a really good looking aesthetic. And when you combine that with Honda's ultra reliable power unit, it was staggering in the corners and acceleration. And what really elevated its legacy? The lineup. Prost, Senna, arguably one of the best pairings in F1 history. Yeah, that would do it. 7 wins from Prost, 8 wins from Senna. Oh boy. This record of the MP4 was not challenged for a good 35 years. That's a pretty big deal. The RB19 is the only one that I think that could even come close to bettering it or even surpassing it. But the reason why it's lower down on this list is that McLaren were already a well-established force. I mean, sure, they weren't expecting it to be an absolute cakewalk, but neither would they have written off McLaren for that year either. So that's why it's relatively low on this list, but its place within F1 history, oh, it's absolutely guaranteed. And then in P7, we have the Matra of 1969. The Matra MS80 was a milestone in F1 history, not just for its performance, but for its symbolism. It became the only F1 car throughout 75 years of competition made by a French manufacturer to win both titles. Because many people think that Jackie Stewart won the 1969 championship with Tyrrell. Well, not quite. Jackie Stewart raced for Matra, but Ken Tyrrell was the team principal. It was a slight difference there, but it did go on to formulate the beginnings of Tyrrell as its own Formula 1 team, and that is the one which won the 1971 championship as well as 73. The Matra of that year, it moved away from the bathtub-shaped monocoques of the era, the cigar tubes, and instead it used a full monocoque with stressed skin construction, reducing weight whilst maintaining stiffness. Stewart exploited this to win 6 races that year, dominating the title. It was also the beginnings of Formula 1 cars changing, and it really started to kick on in the 70s when aerodynamics really was starting to be understood, because you gotta remember in 1969, the year before, that's when they discovered that rear wings were a thing, and they were on those little tubes, like 5 feet in the air, and they had no idea how aerodynamics worked relative to what they are now. And yeah, this was just started to begin the slight evolution which we really saw exacerbate itself the following year with that irrelevant Lotus, but we'll get to that in a moment. But the Matra, it was its own feat of engineering. Its success not only challenged the dominance of British constructors as well as the garagistes, but it also symbolised a growing European technological collaboration in motorsport. And of course, again, it set in motion the relationship of Stewart and Tyrrell that would carry Tyrrell through all the way through the early 70s. Now, okay, we are at this point in the list about discussing Loti, the 78 and the 72. Which one of those is the more significant car of this particular era of Formula 1? Many people think it's a 78, others think it's a 72. Well, in my honest opinion, I do believe it is the 72. But we will discuss as to why the 78 was also really important. They're relatively close on this list. They're really important and significant, and also blew away expectations. But the 78, of course, heralded in ground effect for several years before being outlawed, and now currently being used again. And their spec of ground effect generated low pressure under the chassis, having great suck of the car down to the road, which only the Brabham fan car could try and replicate in terms of performance. But of course they then self-banned it to avoid further controversy. But the ground effect cars, they lived on. Before, underfloor technology was not really understood all that much. It was all about relying on aero from the top. That's why you notice that at the beginning of 1970 and the end of it, the cars changed considerably to really reflect how aerodynamics were becoming more and more important. With the 78 though, it used both planes, the wing car on top, and then the ground effect, the skirts as well, those Lotus skirts on the bottom. So it was coming from all directions. Mario Andretti, Gunnar Nilsson, they scored 5 wins and numerous podiums in the 1977 season. Although it was not dominant enough to win the championship that year, it did grant Mario the title the following year. Okay, now we talk about the Lotus 72, and one of the key reasons why I rate it higher than the 78 is because it endured for far longer, probably one of the longest serving Formula 1 cars in its history. It went all the way from 1970 to 1975. It had the more visible impact too, blowing away expectations in breaking nearly every convention at the time. It featured a wedge-shaped profile for improved aerodynamics, no radiator at the front, And the side pods, well, they were brand new, radical at the time. And this allowed for a narrower nose, better airflow, and of course you then had the standard which is now modern to this day. In 1970, it absolutely dominated the competition with Jochen Rindt, the only champion to have won the title posthumously after a very unfortunate accident that year. And it did make you wonder, had he actually survived and endured the rest of the season, it would have been even more dominant. It hung in there, it did go on to win the Constructors, but the fact is though, it was a groundbreaking machine which really defined the decade and the evolution forward to getting the sort of design of Formula One car, the base template as to what we're accustomed to today. It's a really important car, but nobody knew what to expect from that machine. And I certainly don't think they were expecting it to endure for several seasons. Then the next one, the Brabham BT19. You see, it holds a rare and remarkable distinction in Formula One, in that it's the only car in which a driver won both titles and he also owned the team, Jack Brabham. Now many people might be thinking, oh come off it Laura, it's not exactly that special, the BT19, it wasn't a super whiz-bang car. Well, that's the point. This was a car that won the 1966 entries through sheer simplicity and just getting it to the end. This car was powered by the Australian-built Repco V8 engine, which although less powerful than Ferrari and BRM rivals, it was a lot lighter, more fuel efficient. Simply put, it was well put together and incredibly easy to maintain, which made it all the more versatile. Also, the team focused on reliability instead of just pure power, in an era of F1 where mechanical failures were incredibly common. A very smart approach to get one over the bigger teams. And like I said, he's the only person in the entire history of Formula One to be able to have driven his own car to a championship and constructors title. Now, Ross Brawn did come close in 2009, but the only difference is that he simply didn't drive the car in competition. That's the only difference. Brawn came close, but Jack Brabham, absolute legend. Then we get to modern times with the Renault R25. It was the car that broke Ferrari's stranglehold on Formula One in the early 2000s, winning Team Enstone its first accolades in about a decade. The R25 combined a meticulously balanced chassis with a Renault engine which was both powerful and reliable. Yeah, a Renault power unit which was powerful and reliable. Yeah, it did happen, folks. Don't let the last 10 years or so cloud your judgment. Renault were extremely good back in the day. They really dropped the ball hard in the turbo hybrid era. It's completely not representative to their past glories, just so you know. Red Bull did them dirty. And then later on they did themselves dirty by just giving up. Not to mention, the car was incredibly stable. It really handled the regulations well, which changed considerably. And not to mention, they were one of the major teams that sported Michelin rubber, which was very, very important in 2005, since the rules there made it incredibly boring that you could not change the tyres throughout an entire race. They had to last the entire time. Michelin were absolutely bossing Bridgestone, simply for the fact that pretty much every single relevant team was using that tyre. With Fernando Alonso, Renault claimed both the drivers and constructors that year, ending Michael's reign of dominance for 5 years. And he became the youngest world champion at the time too, Fernando, winning 7 races, finishing on the podium 15 times. This was a really great example of how Renault once applied itself incredibly well. Yeah, it's just a shame it didn't last, really, as we all know, and, well, yeah, we lament. But speaking of applying oneself, you only have to look to Williams in 1992 with the FW14B, arguably one of the most technologically advanced Formula One cars of all time. It was what tried to tempt Senna to go over there, but then suddenly the FIA just went, yoink! None of that for you! It was an evolution of the 1991 FW14, the B version integrating all of these cutting-edge technologies, which redefined what was even possible in race car engineering and made this car, which was already pretty good, utterly unstoppable. Active suspension. Need I say more? No one was quite sure what was going on. I was reading Adrian Newey's book, and there was a lot of uncertainty regarding how practical active suspension and all of these other gubbins could possibly be. Whether it might become so intricate, it may completely change the sport. And then, of course, semi-automatic gearboxes were coming into trend. I think Ferrari were one of the major pioneers of it in 1990 or something like that. But there was a lot of uncertainty whether or not it would be really effective, or it would just overcomplicate things. Well, yeah, let's just say the FW14B, it completely blew apart expectations because Nigel Mansell won that championship 1992 with several races to spare. And again, you know you've made yourself a really good car when the FIA then goes on to ban all the stuff that made it so good in 1994. It was absolutely insane how good that was. When you get the rules being changed just about how good your car was, it deserves a place on this list, which would make you think that I would put the F2004 on this list because in 2005, a lot of these rules were being brought in to stop Ferrari. However, I feel like the 2004, it's not exactly overrated, but I feel like it's got its own spotlight here, and this is my video, so I want to give it to the one that really exceeded and broke the mold after a really good 2001, the F2002. It was so technically refined, and Michael Schumacher securing the championship in July, the regulations were changed to allow more drivers to score points, it going down to 8th, and the gap between first and second going down from 4 points to 2 points. The F2002, it was a masterpiece of integration, with its every component designed to work in perfect harmony. And that's why I think the F2002 deserves a little bit more praise than the 04, because, well, the 04 was a development of the 02. The 02 came first, simple as that. One of the car's most innovative features was its gearbox. Ultra-compact, titanium case, it was light, strong, and aerodynamically efficient, aggressively at the back, including those exhaust covers which peaked out the top after they already pioneered it by just having the exhaust kind of aerodynamically being streamed at the back from 1998. And as we all know, Michael Schumacher that year was utterly untouchable. It was so much of a masterclass. They came so close to beating McLaren's 1988 competition record because they won 15 out of the 7 competitions. It was so tight. And yes, of course, it was blazingly quick, but much like some of the other cars I mentioned on this list, it was incredibly reliable, which really helped as well because, sure, in the 2000s, cars were a lot more reliable than the 90s, 80s, 70s, what have you. Yeah, but they still broke down. I never recall back when I was younger that many races would go the distance without at least one DNF. Nowadays, it's becoming more and more common. I think there were 3 last year, and we've already had 1, so who's to say how many more we'll have this year? But then hopefully 2026 will change that. We'll get some more unreliability and a little bit more jeopardy in that department. But yes, the F2002, it caps off this list. I think it deserves it, and I really hope you enjoyed this. And I really hope that you enjoy some of the other videos on this channel, and one of them I reckon you'll like particularly is this one. So I'll see you over there next, straight after this one.